happy Father's Day to all the dads and father figures and grandpas and uncles who have stepped in out there that are, really doing a job of leading the young men and women in our lives to become the men and women of God that He's called them to be. And today we celebrate fathers and we celebrate who they are and what they do. But one of the things that I want to do is just speak to us as fathers and leaders is what does it look like to seek God in our everyday lives? I mean, as a leader, as a dad myself, I know it's an important role in my family's life that I lead them well and that I help them to find the plans and purposes that God has for them. And one of the things that we've been doing together as a congregation is we've been looking at the story of Joshua as he's been leading, and he's taking sort of this patriarchal role over from Moses as the father or the leader of the Israelites. And if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Joshua chapter 9 for the majority of the day today. But let me give you some context as you're finding your way to Joshua chapter 9. The book of Joshua follows the book of Deuteronomy and serves as it's the sixth book of the Old Testament, and it describes a period after Moses' death, and Joshua takes the leadership of the Israelites and leads them to the Promised Land. And so now Joshua is sort of like I said, the patriarchal father of Israel at the moment, and he is, in the preceding chapters to chapter 9. The Israelites have successfully crossed over the Jordan River, and they've begun their military campaign to conquer the land of Canaan, or the Promised Land, as it were. They've already defeated the city of Jericho through the miraculous intervention of God, and the Israelites were now seen as a more than formidable force. And they're surrounding the Canaanite nations and becoming increasingly aware of the presence, the potential, and the threat that the Israelites provide. And in many ways, it's like, get out of the way. And so when we turn our attention to Joshua chapter 9, specifically, in this passage, we find that the kings of the Canaanite nations west of the Jordan, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, they all joined forces and formed this coalition against the Israelites. And they're recognized the Israelites as this significant military power and decided to unite against them. However, one tribe in the land of Canaan doesn't do this. They're the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites, they're this group of people who lived in the region that took a different approach. Rather than engaging in warfare, they sought to make peace with the armies of God. And they understand that the Israelites had a divine mandate to conquer the land, and so the Gibeonites devised a plan to deceive Joshua and the Israelite leaders. And so the Gibeonites sent a delegation to Joshua, and they dressed in worn-out clothes, carrying worn-out supplies and moldy bread as they traveled the long distance. And they claimed that they were from a distant land and requested a treaty of peace with the Israelites. And so the Gibeonites, their goal or their aim was to appear as if they had not been amongst the other nations targeted by the destruction of the command of God. And so Joshua and the Israelite leaders, they were cautious in moving forward, but they didn't consult the Lord or seek His guidance on the particular matter. And so the deception becomes sort of a reality because they never asked God for direction. They never asked God's help in the situation. And so they believe the Gibeonites' deception. They enter in to this peace treaty with them, promising not to harm them. And the Israel leaders make a bonding oath in the name of God, sealed with the covenant, without realizing the Gibeonites were actually from the nearby Canaanite nations, right? So they perceive them and believe the lie, and then they make a blood oath. And so their word is bond because they gave their word based off of their oath to God. And so later on, after discovering the truth, Joshua and the Israelites, they honor their oath and they protected the Gibeonites, but they also were upset with their leaders for not seeking the Lord's counsel. In this passage in Joshua chapter 9, it could serve as a reminder for us as leaders, as fathers, as parents, to really seek God's guidance in more aspects of our life than we're currently seeking God's guidance. Let's look at the passage together. Joshua chapter 9, it says, "As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country, in the lowland, along the coast of the Great Sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, they all gathered together to fight as one against Joshua and Israel. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that Joshua, what he had done at Jericho and Ai, they did their part and acted with cunning and went out ready to make provisions look like worn out sacks for their donkeys and wineskin, worn out, torn, and mended clothing, and worn out patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes, and their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, and they said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country." So this is where the lie begins. So they make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us, and now you can make a covenant with you." They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where did you come from?" They said to him, "We're from a very distant country. Your servants have come because of the name of your Lord your God." And so they didn't just lie. They preyed upon their faith and their goodness and their kindness as being followers of Yahweh. And he says, "Because of the name of your God, and we heard the report of him and what he did in Egypt and what he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, and Sidon and the king of Hisham, and Og the king of Bahashan, and who lived in Asheroth. And then the elders of all the inhabitants of the countries said to us, 'Take provisions and go in your hand for the journey, and go meet with them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now, make a covenant with us. Here's our bread. It is still warm from when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new, but when we filled them, and behold, they have burst, and all the garments and our sandals are worn out from the very long journey. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask God from counsel from the Lord. Didn't ask counsel from the Lord. And so really the big mistake that they make in this moment is, and it'll come later to bite Israel in the butt, is they didn't ask God's advice. They didn't seek God's plans or purposes. And so what I want to speak to you, specifically to leaders, fathers, parents today, is how to seek God in every season of your life. One of the ways that you can seek God is you seek God when the pressure's on you. I mean, sometimes when the pressure's on, you feel like you have to make a decision in a hurry, and you don't have time to pray about it. You don't have time to seek God. In Joshua chapter 9, 1 and 2, as soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and the lowland along the coast and the great sea towards Lebanon heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. So the pressure's on. And because the pressure's on, they should have done a better job at seeking God's decisions. And maybe, I don't know, maybe they were a little full of themselves because they were believing that they didn't have to, because everything that they've done so far has been win, 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 no matter what. But the truth of the matter is that when you stop relying on God's strength, when you stop seeking God for answers, then you're working in your own power and your own strength. For me, as a father, as a leader, sometimes I can feel like life is a battlefield, and I face challenges, and the responsibilities and the pressures of life can be a heavy weight. And in Joshua's time, as soon as all the kings surrounded Joshua, and even though he'd had victories, they all united against Israel. What does Joshua do? He seeks God. When everything seems to be against us, when the weight of the world rests on our shoulders, we have to remember to seek God. He is our source of strength, guidance, and wisdom. How are you intentionally seeking God, especially when the pressure's on? Like, are you carving out time in your life to say, God, what do you want me to do in my finances? What do you want me to do in my career? What do you want me to do in my family? And I know that's hard to do when the pressure's on, but that's when you need God the most. The second, if you're taking notes, the best time to seek God is when it looks like this is a good thing. Like, what I mean by that is like when it looks like you're going to win, when it looks like things are going to be just great. If you look back at Joshua chapter 9, 8 through 14, you see this whole reality is that the Gibeonites are deceiving them, and it looks too good to be true. It looks like them saying, hey, we want to add to your number. We want to be a part of your tribes. We want to be, with you in this. When in reality, they just were deceiving them, and so they didn't have to. They were lying to them. Remember, they came to them in these old, worn-out clothes and with moldy, crusty bread and said, like, we've been traveling for a long, long time to get to you, to let you know that we're on your side. And so they agreed and exchanged the gifts of provision for their protection, but they never asked God's permission. Sometimes the decisions that we face aren't as black and white as we think they are. The inhabitants of Gibeon deceives Joshua and the Israelites because Joshua and the Israelites believed that they were travelers from a distant land. And they even went to great lengths to make their provisions look like they were travelers from a distant land. And they fell into their trap. In our lives, we're going to encounter situations that seem good on the surface. Like, well, why not add to our army? Why not? It's a windfall. Why not do that? Why not take that promotion? Why not, win that, windfall? Or why not take advantage of that? It seems like it's just like right there in front of me. I don't need to ask God for permission if I'm going to win automatically. But yeah, seeking God's counsel, even when it seems like a sure thing, I think is super important. We have to learn from Joshua and the Israelites' mistake, and that seeking God's wisdom every time we make a decision is going to be a really powerful way for us to make sure that we don't experience a loss on accident. Number 3, if you're taking notes, seek God when you're experiencing success. In Joshua chapter 9, verses 1 and 3, you say, as soon as all the kings heard of this, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua. But the inhabitants of Gibeon heard that what Joshua had done to Jericho and at Ai. And so if you keep reading, skip down to verse 8, that they said to Joshua, we're your servants. And he says, well, who are you? And all of this stuff comes unfolding. And he says, so our elders and our inhabitants of the country said to us, take provisions in your hand and go for them. And so they're kind of like, man, not only is the enemy afraid of us, that they're all rallying together. So yeah, at one point that's feeling like pressure, but now there's these other armies that are traveling from far away to go, you've been so victorious, we want to be on your team. And so they're feeling a little maybe too big for their britches. Maybe they're feeling like, look how successful we've become. Look at what we've been able to do. The problem is success in our minds can be a bit of a double-edged sword. When Joshua and the Israelites are conquering the promised land and the inhabitants of Gibeon approach them, claiming to be from this far-off distant land and seeking a covenant, the Israelites are unaware of their deceit and they make this covenant. Sometimes our success in our everyday life can blind us to what we're supposed to be doing when it comes to seeking God for wisdom and for counsel. No matter how successful I become, I never want to forget to ask God for guidance, and I want to rely on Him for every step in my journey. So it's in the good times, it's in the bad times, it's in the down times, it's in the successful times, but probably more important, it's important, number 4, if you're taking notes, to seek God so that you don't damage the potential of your future. Joshua and the children of Israel, they agree to make this covenant with them, and if you keep reading in verses 16 through 21 of Joshua chapter 9, it says, at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were neighbors that lived among them, and all the people of Israel sent out and reached their cities on the 3rd day. But when the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and that all the congregation murmured against the leaders, and the leaders said to them and to all the congregation of people, we have sworn to them by the Lord and the Lord of Israel, we may not touch them, and this is what we're going to do. And so they let them live, and at least the wrath upon us. And so what they're saying is, like, we made a promise to God. We made a promise to God to care for them, even though they deceived us. And so we let them live. And the leader said, let them live so they may be cutters of wool and drawers of water in the land of our congregation, just as the leaders said of them. And he's like, well, here's what we did, right? we discovered the truth about the Gibeonites, but we made this covenant with them. We realized that we'd been deceived, but it's a little bit too late because we gave our word in the name of God. And so our failure to seek God's promises now has brought consequences. Similarly, in 2 Samuel, something similar happens. We see King David is facing a famine in the land, and God reveals that there was this blood guilt on the house of Saul for putting the Gibeonites to death. So Saul later on decides that, this is stupid, and I'm going to just get rid of the Gibeonites. That Joshua and all those guys a long time ago should have already done this. And so he puts the Gibeonites to death, and their actions in the past generations has consequences that affect their descendants. Why? Well, because Saul broke the blood oath. Later on in the future, Saul breaks the blood oath and goes to war with the Gibeonites, even though the Israelites swore an oath to not go to war with them. And so, as fathers, as leaders, our decisions don't just impact our lives in the here and now, but they shape the future of our families and our communities. And so, if you don't seek God when you make decisions, then your kids are going to be left picking up the pieces of the decisions that you made. This is why you have to be wise in seeking God when it comes to your financial future. This is why you have to be wise in seeking God on the things that you watch and the things that you do and the way that you live your life. This is why you have to seek God when it comes to how should we spend our money and how should we live our lives and where should we go to church and how should we, raise our kids and where should they go to school. Like, why? Because if you don't seek God in both the good, bad, and the ugly, then you don't know what's going to happen. And if you don't seek God, then you don't have the ability to the best of your ability secure the future for your children. In 2 Samuel 21, there's a famine and, in the days of David. And so after 3 years and year after year, and David sought the face of the Lord and said, why is the famine happening? And he says, well, because the king before you, Saul, went to war with the Gibeonites, and there was a promise made. And so because of his disobedience, he broke the covenant. There has to be consequences. And ultimately, David goes to the Gibeonites and says, well, how can we fix this? How can we make atonement? The Gibeonites want them to sacrifice 7 of their men, of their sons, in order to make up for, the thing that had been done wrong. And so like a public execution. And so, this is like a war-torn, hard time back in the day, medieval war torture type of stuff. But, I want you to think about it for a second. Now, David's holding the bag because Saul broke the oath, but Saul was holding the bag because Joshua and his leaders didn't seek God when they made the promise. What we do in the here and now resonates into the future and into eternity. And so seeking God is important. Seeking God when things are hard, important. Seeking God when things seem to be good, important. Seeking God in the middle of super successful seasons, super important. Seeking God so that the future is secure in God is of the utmost importance. As fathers, as leaders, it's just super important for us to pay attention to. Today, I want to leave you with this reminder of the importance of seeking God in every aspect of our lives. Whether we're facing challenges or we're looking good opportunities right in the face, when our decisions shape our future, it's important that we seek God's guidance. He's always ready to lead us, empower us, and as leaders, as dads, he's called us, to be the men that he's calling us to be and rely on his strength and seeking his face as we navigate this beautiful journey together. But we have to seek God. Dads, listen to me. If you could do one thing to make sure that your children's future is secure, is to seek God's guidance. When the pressure's on, seek God's guidance. When opportunities in front of you just seem super great, still seek God's guidance. When you're on the heels of success, seek God's guidance. Because if you don't seek God's guidance, you have no ability to secure the future generations, and to make sure that they're secure in their knowledge of who God is. Seek God always in everything you do, in good times, in hard times, in bad times, when there's situations that seem too good to be true. Seek God's guidance. And if you seek God He'll meet you where you are, and He'll give you the strength and the courage to follow Him and lead your family and lead your community and lead the spaces and places He's called you to. So above all else, seek God. That's my gift to you dads today on Father's Day, is this encouragement to seek God in every situation. I hope you have a great day. I hope your kids spoil you. I hope you have a wonderful time with your family. But above all else, look to God to be your leader.